University, which gained national prominence with its unique style of offering higher education, is situated in this city.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, my fellow friends. Hope you all are doing good. It's happy to see you all on this Sunday evening. First of all, I thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor PVGD Prasad Reddy Garu for launching the virtual Tech Talk platform, and I also thank Professor P. Srinivas Rao Garu for giving the wonderful opportunity to host the virtual Tech Talk platform, which is named as G.I.T.A. As initiated by AU College of Engineering, Andhra University, Visakhapatnam, a series of tech talks are being organized uh, by the General Interest Topics Avenue, which is also known as G.I.T.A. G.I.T.A provides an online platform for the enrichment of technical knowledge of the student fraternity of Andhra University and other universities and colleges as well. Gita invites technical by domain experts and faculty and scholars to share their views and expertise with the budding engineers and entrepreneurs of India. In this connection, Gita, a series of tech talks, are streamed live through our YouTube channel on every Sunday at 7 p.m. I hope today's session will help you gain knowledge and benefit you. So now I hand over the session to the anchor, whose name is Reshma. Please take over the screen.
Nice introduction about Geeta, the Tech Talks, which is initiated at the university. So, as told by Vinil himself, Tech Talks has been initiated in the university itself, whose chief patron is Professor P.V.G.D. Prasad Reddy, Chairman Professor P. Srinivas Rao, who is none other than the principal of College of Engineering, Andhra University. Also, the teacher mentor is Professor Mallikarjuna Rao Pasmati, and the student organizer himself is Vinil Judson. So, as told, motivation is the fuel that ignites the engine of innovation. So, this is one good platform where you can get innovative ideas and where you can even get the motivation for it. Also, now I would like to talk about Mr. Our speaker, who is Mr. Nithish Kumar is. He is also with us today in the session. So, I would like to introduce him to you all now. Nitish Kumar is is the CEO of Alinea Ventures LLP and is also the chairperson of SEDS India. Nitish says he is an entrepreneur and an aspiring rocket scientist in the making. He says that he believes that we truly grow when we make sure on how we work and how the way we work to uplift those who are with us. He also says that he successfully developed the Aero Modeling Club in his college to create more opportunities for his peers to work hands on. Over the years, they have managed to build a community of 50 strong, passionate people who work on all kinds of projects from drones to aeroplanes. As a testimony to their efforts, he says they have won National Aero Modeling Contest organized by SAE India for the best technical presentation. He also says he has been the chair for a national non-profit called SEDS India, which is Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. SEDS is the world's largest student-run STEM non-profit organization with chapters all across the world. He says that he also serves as the secretary for the University Astronomy Club Stellario. He says that he caught tech entrepreneur bug when he worked with Team Indus on a lunar experimental payload called Space for Life. The payload aimed at testing lunar regolith JSE-2A for its radiation shielding ability. As the mechanical systems lead, I had to design and develop and launch qualify the payload, says Mr. Nithish. Working with engineers and scientists from ISRO gave him a first-hand experience working with actual space-grade projects. He presented the work to the mission director of Chandrayaan-1, Dr. K. Tyagarajan, Dr. Srinivasa Hegde, and Dr. N.C. Bhatt, who is the Indian astronaut trainee Roscosmos Russian Space Agency. He says he had a great opportunity to collaborate and work with an Italian science team from the University of Naples under the guidance of Dr. Maria P., during which he got the opportunity to personally connect and network with the director of French Space Agency, Dr. Gilles Rabin, and got a tribute. Mr. Nitish holds the key positions like follows. He is the co-founder of Alinea Ventures LLP. He is also the chair of SEDS India for a period of 2020 to 2021, and he is the team lead of Team Indus. He is the president of Aero Modeling Club at Sastra, chief guest of Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, Trivandrum. He is the secretary of Stellaria, which is none other than the University Astronomy Club, global representative for India, SEDS Earth, and then he is the vice chair of SEDS India from the year 2019 to 2020. He is also the executive director of SEDS India for a period about 2018 to 2019. He is also the creator of the Unbounded podcast, Startups and Space. Oh, wait, but did you just make any picture of the person whom I spoke about right now? Just hold on there. Mr. Nitish is right now into his final year aerospace engineering at Sastra University. I very glad to having met uh, Mr. Nitish, and I'm very glad to and I'm very glad to share about him. And I would like to now give this time to Mr. Vinil. Mr. Vinil, over to you.
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction about Nitish. Now I hand over the screen to Nitish. Nitish, please address our students of Andhra University and other colleges of Andhra Pradesh and India as well. I hope today's session will be a great informative session and innovative session for the students of India. Thank you for being with us. Uh, Over to you, Nitish.
Thank you, Vinil, and thank you, Reshma. I hope I'm audible. A real quick check. Am I audible right now properly? I mean, you can just type it there. Cool. Thank you. So I think that was a really very succinct introduction for somebody like me. To be very honest, I'm just a student. I'm in the final year of my aerospace engineering degree at Shastra. So I think that would have basically done. So anyway, I think when you put it that way, I think it really sounds very grand. So on that note, I really thank all of you guys for inviting me on for a talk. And I really hope that whoever is listening to this will have something to learn at the end of the day after this talk, right? So I'm just going to do a very, formal, or should I say, not very formal, perhaps a little bit informal session itself. But then I do have a presentation to share just to provide a visual insight. But apart from that, much of what I'm going to speak is primarily going to be a little bit conversational, at least a sense of it. So I hope we can begin. So let me just quickly share my screen. Yeah, if I do this. So I hope my screen is visible. So can I get a quick message? Thank you. Okay. Right. So let's just begin really quickly, right? So all of you, I'm sure you would have seen the topic of discussion that we're going to have today. So that is basically what I put it here. So it's going to be space and entrepreneurship. And the very interesting thing that all of us have to note is the specific tagline that I've mentioned here, which is basically the one stable juxtaposition. So juxtaposition essentially means that it is a comparison between two very contrasting things that have been put together, and then that somehow really works, right? So now it will really start to make sense when you think about space and entrepreneurship and the tagline itself. So right, I'll just quickly move on and introduce myself. Of course, Reshma has already done that, but real quick. So I am Nithish for all of you, and I am the CEO of Alenia Ventures LLC. We are essentially trying to create India's version of Shark Tank in another manner. So I'm not going to talk about that in detail. So you can go up on Google and then browse us and then get to know what we're trying to do. So that's basically me. And if you guys have seen Unbounded on YouTube, which is a space startup podcast, I am the creator of that. And I'm also the chair of what is called the India, which is the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, which was founded at MIT in Boston, United States. So quick pictures on the right side. If you can see my cursor here, so that is also me giving a talk at the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, which is IISc, in Trivandrum, as most of you would know, with a bunch of other space startup CEOs here. So I again got the opportunity to do the same thing for them as well. So I'm pretty glad that I am invited out by you guys as well. So that's basically me, and we'll quickly move to the discussion. So yeah, if you look at my slide and if you look at the lower left corner, it basically says timeline, and there is basically no year that I mentioned on the slide. There is a reason for that, because I wanted to keep everything, really interactive, as interactive as possible. I just don't want to put everything on the slide itself. So we're just basically starting off with a quote called, I think it's possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary, right? So that's really easy for a guy who works 105 hours a week instead of 40 hours. That basically any person that has any sense would work. So I think that's the parallel that we are trying to draw here. You can really choose to be extraordinary, anybody for that matter. And as a proof of that, I have a lot of content coming down on my slides. So just please stay focused, right? So that's basically it. And I just put the Unbounded channel logo there for all of you. And now comes the timeline part, as mentioned in this slide, right? So a very quick, interesting fact for all of you. 5 years before, we have 2020 right now. At 2015, we literally had about 7 to 8 space startups. Of course, not a lot of them were actually, well known. So a lot of startups are, they just pop up here and there, and then they're not really sustainable. So what really matters is how many startups actually sustain, and then they get the resources to, finish what they actually started. That's a real big question. But 5 years ago, nobody was actually looking even into the space startup ecosystem, because everything was dominated by the Indian Space Research Organization. Of course, they are the pioneers for space research, and especially in a developing country like us, there is always this parallel that is drawn. When there are so many other social issues that have to be taken care of, why really put money into something called the space, right? So for a lot of people, space is simply like a fantasy. That's all. So they don't really see the value that it brings, and that is often parallel that's really drawn. Even the investing ecosystem was not very much oriented towards the space startups, because, to be very honest, nobody has actually proven that legit space activities can be done by a small startup like Team Indus or Bellatrix or whatever it is that we'll be discussing later. So, I mean, so it's only fair that people have that kind of notion. But here's the interesting thing. I hope that all of you would actually know about the proverbial called as the 5 minute mile. So nobody actually thought that people will be able to run a mile in 5 minutes. And once actually one person did, the next year itself actually 11% broke that record, which means that one person had to show that it could be done. And that person, or if we draw a small parallel from there, and from that analogy and bring it to the space startup or the entrepreneurship ecosystem, that parallel would obviously correlate to team industry, which is also a great startup that I'll be discussing about a bit later. Right. So somebody has to show in India that a private company could reach that far with respect to whatever it is that they're doing in space. So yeah, that's basically the timeline. And we are in 2020 now, 5 years from 2015, and we are at 50 sustainable startups that have been registered. So which means that's a 10 times growth, right? So and 5 years from now, again, if you just linearly extrapolate things, you will, or we are supposed to have at least the number of startups in the lower triple digits. So something about 100, right? And of course, we could expect that many of those would actually be sustainable. So that's basically the timeline that we are talking about. And so the basic underlying fact here is the aspect of growth of that ecosystem in a country like India. So I hope that's pretty clear. So if somebody asks you that, is there space for, is there actually scope for space startups, or if there is any scope for the aerospace sector? Because a lot of us, the Indian mentality is like, we think, or we only choose whichever is the safer bet for us. We say that there is a lot of scope for this. I can easily get a job in this field, so I want to take up this degree, and that has to be broken now, right? So because the world is entirely changing, and we have to keep up with it. So I think that basically summarizes things for you. If somebody tells that there is no scope for space, then they don't know about what is happening around. So I think you can be pretty confident on that. So moving on very quickly, this is going to be the agenda for today's talk. Really the basics of what space entrepreneurship is, right? And the Indian scenario, we're going to have a lot of interesting new startups, and then we're going to simply look at what they do, and then what is so special about them that we have to discuss this on here, right, on this platform. So that's basically the second point. And the third is the interesting statistics. Again, I'm going to pull off some really huge numbers, some really interesting numbers that you can't find on the internet generally. And four is the investor ecosystem. So how are actually people looking to invest in say startups? How is the industry performing? And what kind of money is actually going through the circuit itself. So that's the fourth point. And fifth is basically the policy effect. So there is something called a space policy, which is going to help a lot of space startups. So we'll just get to a little bit detail on what space policy is and how it's going to affect the entire ecosystem down the line. But for now, I think that's the agenda for you. Right. So very simply, what is space entrepreneurship? Of course, all of you know that entrepreneur is somebody who is actually a business person or who has actually created a business, right? So anybody can be an entrepreneur. A tea seller, a tea vendor is an entrepreneur. Somebody who's actually owning a small stationery store is an entrepreneur. But Sundar Pichai is not an entrepreneur because he doesn't own Google, or he hasn't started Google. So just a little parallel there. And of course, we have the global titans, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, very, very common names that all of us would find if we do a little bit digging on the space startup ecosystem itself. That's basically, the gist of space entrepreneurship. And if you look at, again, the title bar that's mentioned on this slide, what is the juxtaposition here? So why do we call space and entrepreneurship as really two contrasting things? Like I mentioned, nobody was actually, even believing the fact that a space startup, somebody who actually newly starts a space company could actually make it big, right? So they are eventually bound to fail. At least that's how people were thinking. So that was the fable 5 years before, and that was the unstable juxtaposition. And now we are currently spending like anything with respect to the number of startups in the space sector itself coming up, right? So space and space everywhere. In fact, the entire Atmanirbhar Bharat project by our Prime Minister Mr. Modi has also focused a lot on the space sector, developing new space ecosystem of India, so to speak, right? So that's basically here. So now comes the question of why. So why is it really important for a country to develop, a private space ecosystem? I mean, why not have just one titan to rule everything? Why not have just one, great body that is going to do tons of missions, so that you can have the great organizing part also that's coming along with it? Why is there a need, in order to have a lot of private space players also coming, right? So let's get one thing straight. In the current age that we are living, it's really important for a country to show its prowess in terms of its space capability. We've had the United States, start up the US Space Force. I mean, why did they do that? They did not have to militarize space, or they did not have to create something called as the Space Force. But they are doing it because they know that it is a show of strength, it is a show of power that the country possesses. So their economy is a lot more stable than our economy, or when compared to some other economies for that matter. So in a way, on very very grand scheme of things, one could actually say that if your country has a really great space policy, a space system, and a space ecosystem itself for that matter, then the country is showing its technological capabilities to the entire world, and that is what people want. And if you look at, like, say, 50 years before, during the Cold War era, like 40, 50 years before, during the USSR and the United States Cold War era, people actually put Sputnik up in the orbit, which is basically the first satellite or the first man-made object in space. Why did they have to do that? Because Sputnik did not have any purpose at all. In fact, all Sputnik did was just to basically receive a signal and then say, "Hey, I'm just present here in the orbit." That's all. It's just a transceiver that's been put into orbit. But what really matters is that stunned the entire world, because now every country knew that the United States, the Soviet Russia, had the capability to put something into orbit, and then they can rule the space, right? So that is what it basically did. And because of that, we have a lot of technological advancements coming in throughout, right? So that's basically really important. But that's just a really small history. But we still haven't gotten the answer to why do we have to have a private space ecosystem itself, right? Let's get one thing straight for all of you guys are listening. Everything is business, in terms of the global titans fighting with each other in terms of money, or in terms of the power, the technology, and everything. People want to make money out of something. That's the reality of how things work. Of course, all of you would definitely know that. But I just hope that it's not really polarizing. But then this is just the sense of it. I hope you understand. So if you look at the capability in terms of making money for any country space organization, say for example, I'm just going to say ISRO or NASA, whatever it is, right? If NASA chooses to manufacture a lot of, or all the equipment for that matter, for their entire space policy, or for the entire space mission, then they wouldn't be as advanced as they are right now. In fact, I think that not most of us actually know that, in fact, NASA does not do its own launches. They lead their entire launches to something or somebody called as the United Launch Alliance, which is called as basically the ULA, right? The ULA is a coalition between, again, two companies, Lockheed Martin and Boeing. They take care of the entire launching part and all that. So they have their own rocket. NASA basically gives them the payload, they launch it, and everybody's happy. But what NASA actually focuses on is they try to build a lot other missions instead of just focus on manufacturing, right? So, say for example, if somebody wanted to manufacture rockets, rocket parts, nacelles, right? They wanted to manufacture batteries. They wanted to manufacture the metallic components involved in the rover, for that matter. NASA cannot take up all the work for themselves and then try to do everything, because then they wouldn't have enough time to focus on actually building missions. And that is why it's really important for anybody or for any space organization that is that big, like ISRO, NASA, ANCASA, ESA, whatever, to actually outsource that entire the manufacturing or the production or whatever aspect that they can to other players, just so they can focus on something, or just so they can focus on something really huge in terms of planning a new mission, in terms of planning a creative mission. They can focus on the science part of it, as opposed to I wouldn't necessarily call it the engineering part alone, but the manufacturing part and all the other, developmental parts. So it's really important that even in a country like ours, where in ISRO, they basically outsource, building to Godrej Aerospace, and then there are a bunch of really strong contract players that ISRO just goes to for certain things. So now what's happening is that now we've had the growth of SpaceX coming in. SpaceX has grown so huge that NASA even basically chose to put their own astronauts on SpaceX missions, and then they just on SpaceX capsule, and then that went off, right? We just had that happen a few months before. It's termed as the Launch America, very fancy, right? So and the entire space ecosystem now in the United States is very very booming. Oh, I'm really sorry. Yeah. Right. So yeah, now the entire space ecosystem of the United States is really booming, and that indirectly means, or basically, the implicit fact there is that the entire economy of the United States is going to get a lot more benefited because space in itself is a $300 billion industry, and everybody wants a big chunk of it. Now the question is who's going to get how much and who's going to make a lot more money out of it. That's the only play here, and that is why it's really important for a country to have as much innovation coming up in a very specific department like space, so that the actual players can also focus on something else, which is building real missions. Now the interesting parallel here is that notion has also changed a lot. And then now people are actually allowing startups, allowing people or players like SpaceX to come and develop their own missions for that matter. SpaceX doesn't just make rockets. SpaceX is also, building their own missions, right? They're having their Starlink pass going out. They want to supply internet to the world at really high speed. And people are looking at that in a positive manner right now. And that's how the industry is changing. And if you really can't cope up with it, then having just one titan who's going to do a lot of things, that wouldn't matter at all, because we will nowhere be able to catch up with all of the players who is basically privatized it. So that's basically the gist of it. Right. So again, pretty basic refresh for all of you who are watching. These are just the basic global players. As you can see, there are a lot of government agencies, there are a lot of private agencies, as you can see. And this is basically the Indian counterpart of that. So, like I mentioned, not a lot of us actually know about the Indian startup ecosystem. Of course, now the awareness is slowly changing, but then I think it really makes sense to, again, re-emphasize on what is happening and then who's actually making it big, so that all of us can, apply to them for opportunities and everything. So we have basically Team Indus, Blue Space, Bellatrix, all kinds of startups here. Some startups are actually focused on outreach activities. Some startups are actually focused on building their own IP, which I will come to in a little bit. But yeah, I think that's basically it. Okay, so we've had a lot of companies for over a lot of centuries right now. But then why is it that space is flourishing only now in the 21st century? Or yeah, only in the 21st century, and that's a really big question, right? We've had the silicon boom, the dot-com bubble, all that happened long before than the space, the breakthrough, the space ecosystem breakthrough itself. So, which means that it is really, really difficult to do something with this industry. And why is it so? Why is that very difficult? And that's something that's really not said out loud. But then I think that's something that all of us have to, be sure of. So, there is, like I mentioned, there is a saying that goes around in industry that you have to spend $1 billion to make $1 million company, not in the literal sense, but just in the figurative sense that, we have to understand that a lot more money actually goes into building missions than the money that people actually get from doing those missions. So that is exactly why, a lot of people don't just go in the space sector and then try to do something with it. But now that the market cap is really huge, say $300, $400 billion, then it makes sense to, build something really, really small, so that you can try and make money with that much alone and then move on really quickly. So I think that's the emphasis of all the startups that are actually developing. They don't try to do a whole lot. They do not want to build rockets and then they do not want to integrate satellites and then put it to orbit. They just want to do one thing and do that one thing really perfectly, very well, so that they can make actually some money out of it and then they can move on. So that's basically the idea that you have to understand, right? I'm not sure when this fact was actually taken, but SpaceX did not actually break even yet. I'm gonna have to, of course, look at the numbers right now to be sure. So you guys can actually go Google this stuff and then find out if they're actually profitable yet. Which means that they've invested a lot more money in building this mission, that even their own missions did not actually give the ROI, which is the return on investment that they would have wanted to see. So that's basically there. And an interesting number here at the end of the slide is mentioned is that the break-even time is around 8 to 9 years for a general startup that's coming out of nothing, right? So say, for example, a player XYZ that is going to start off today to this date, in the space sector, and then invest a lot of money in that, and then let's just say that any one of you who's watching here is going to build a company today. It will take around 5 to 6 years, or in fact 7, 8 years for you to actually make some money out of it, and then you will get the product to launch. Because again, there is another saying that goes around the ecosystem, right? So it goes like, if you plan that you will launch a product in 3 days, it will actually take 9 days to get that done. So which means that it doesn't matter how much you plan or what you plan, always going to be delayed, right? So the question is, can you sustain for 9 days instead of just three? That's a real big factor that's basically going to determine, if a startup is going to be successful or not. So that's basically for you to understand. Of course, these are not very, I wouldn't say that every startup will have this much time or will require this much time to be to turn into profitable. To turn profitable. This is just a general number that I have observed with a lot of players out there in the Indian ecosystem. So this is basically, strictly in my opinion, based on my observations for that matter. So everything, in fact, that I say is basically based on what I know about the ecosystem. So yeah, it should be very clear, right? So now let's just get into a little bit specific. We're going to talk about two or three main players, and then these guys are actually funded, which means that they are sustainable, and you guys can go and apply for internships, projects, whatever with these guys, and then learn something great out of it, right? So first comes Bellatrix Aerospace. So if you remember, probably 4 slides before, I mentioned that somebody had to show the Indian ecosystem that doing a space startup and then sustaining it is actually possible. And I mentioned the first name, Team Indus. Well, there are actually 4 people or 4 members that actually started off and then showed the world, showed the country that it's possible. And one among them is Bellatrix. First came Dhruva Space, then came Team Indus, then came Bellatrix, right? And then these guys are still sustainable, right? So they are still functioning. And what's really interesting is that Bellatrix Aerospace is actually secured a launch for 2021, which means they're going to actually test out their microelectronic thrusters in the orbit next year. So I think that's really cool because for all that we've spoken about until now, about all the space startups and everything, nobody has actually managed to put something on the orbit and then try it out yet, right? So these guys will be the first players. I mean, I wouldn't say that these guys are the first players, but these guys will be one of the players who will actually test out what they've built in the orbit next year. So they're actually secure launch. And one interesting point to note here. So like I mentioned, 5 years before, not a lot of people are we're actually looking to invest in space startups. But I will tell you one fact that's very, very funny and interesting as well. Bollywood actress Deepika Padukone is actually an investor for Bellatrix Aerospace. So you can go and verify that fact as well. So that just goes to say how much people are actually looking into investing in these companies for that matter. So yeah, that's just a fun fact for you guys. Then comes Dhruva Space, again founded by Sanjay. These guys actually do small sat integration and all that. So a lot of small sat players like Dhruva Space are actually coming up in India. In fact, there is a coalition happening in Ahmedabad with Ajusta Industries and Berlin Space Technology, which is also a very well-known German aerospace startup or an aerospace company for that matter. So yeah, you guys can, if you're interested in really building satellite developing, then you guys can check them out and then get something done. So that's Dhruva Space for you. Then comes Team Indus, which is, I would say that which is really audacious startup because they started off by participating in the competition called the GLXP, which basically stands for Google Lunar Express. So the event was that you had to develop and design and then put a rover on the moon and then drive the rover for 500 meters and then send back a lot of high definition images as a proof of the concept that or the proof of the mission itself. So that was the goal that they had set out to achieve. And then unfortunately in 2020 Google Lunar Express declared that they're wrapping up the event because not all of the finalists were able to secure a launch in order to show proof of concept for what they've been building. But then now Team Indus says is a lunar services, payload services provider. They're actually working on a bunch of other things as well for you to look at. But one interesting or one fact that you can know about Team Indus, of course, this is located in Bangalore. In fact, all the startups that I mentioned until now is actually headquartered in Bangalore. So that's the place you want to be if you want to work in the ecosystem itself. So one important thing that you guys have to note about Team Indus is that they have a facility called the Lunar Crater. So it is a huge room, completely filled with simulated lunar soil, simulated lunar dust. So it's basically just white dust with the same characteristics as that of the moon. So it was an amazing experience. I once got to wear, a bunch of equipment and then put the rover on the lunar soil in the room and then test that out. That we built. So I think that's a really interesting thing to see for you guys. And there's also mission control. there for you to look at. This will be really a nice auditorium with a lot of screens and a lot of clocks, just like how they show in the movies. So that's basically given up to you. Right. So one very, very, very promising startup called Pixel Space. So what's really great about them is that AUCE, who is the founder of Pixel Space, is actually I think 23 or 24 right now. He's from Bits, and these guys do not do hardcore, mechanical tech. But what they actually do is they're actually building a geospatial imaging group, which means that they are building a cluster of satellites that is going to basically picture, the Earth and then sell that pictures for money in the very most crude and the literal sense possible. So that's the concept of geospatial imaging is that. So a lot of image processing happens, and they are renowned for that. At least that the test that they have done and the proof of concept that they have shown. I think their image processing is probably one of the best in the world. So that is again an amazing innovation that's happening. Now, one very interesting fact is that these guys are going to actually fly in the next 2 to 3 quarter. I think the next quarter itself, this is going to fly outside the Earth and then deploy. In fact, they have actually shipped their satellite, the first satellite that they are going to put out to ISRO. So ISRO is going to act as their launchers and then get it. I mean, they're going to get that done, which is really, really huge for any startup for that matter. So if you are into image processing, if you are into computer science, you don't have to essentially be an aerospace engineer for this. Please consider working at Pixel. You guys are really doing a really great job, right? And of course, I hope that a lot of you, I mean, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have been waiting, so much for this moment. The rocket startups, the launch vehicle startups, basically. So India's had a lot of innovation come up in a lot of different ways, but nobody really expected India, a private company in India, to actually build a rocket. Apart from ISRO to put something out in space, but then two startups come in with this huge goal. And one interesting thing is that these guys are actually going to make it. So in fact, Agnikul Cosmos and Skyroot Aerospace are the players. Agnikul Cosmos, I know Srinath is from Columbia in New York. He's a management guy. He was an engineer, and then he basically came back to do this startup. One really interesting thing is that they're actually entirely 3D printing the entire engine. And I think that's the first of its kind. You wanted the made in India. So these guys are incubated at IIT Madras, research lab, National Combustion Research Institution, which is basically a $30 million lab. You have all the facilities that you need in order to build and test the rocket like this there. So if you're looking to intern somewhere, and then if you want to, work on actual rockets that are going to put things into space, these two players are the place to be. And Skyroot Aerospace is again located in Hyderabad, which is very close to you. Skyroot Aerospace is also developing their own version of a rocket, and the founders, Bharat and Naga, those guys are actually ex-ISRO scientists. They've worked on the GSLV missions and all that, and they actually saw a very good market opportunity for a small satellite launch vehicle for that matter, and that is how Skyroot actually took birth. So that's basically those two startups for you. And one really important thing that you have to understand is that these guys are not just show. There is a very famous saying in Texas which goes like all has to no cattle, which means you have everything to show for, but then no real work that's done. But these guys are actually the opposite of it because they have something to show for, and then they're actually doing a really commendable work, right? So Agnikul, Cosmos has been actually listed in the European Space Agency's launch services provider list, and Skyroot Aerospace is actually a really promising player that ISRO is also directly working with them. In fact, last week they had a meet with the National Security Advisor (NSA) of India in order to get a few things checked out, which is really cool, right? So I mean, again, the kind of money that's actually involving in this ecosystem, Nickel Cosmos actually got funded for about 30 crore rupees by Special Invest, which is actually an investing firm based out of Bangalore. So that's just for their seed round. So when I say seed round, they're essentially valuing a startup at a great level, right? So seed round is the first round of funding that you will raise in order to show the proof of concept. And for that, these guys have actually gotten around 26 crore rupees, right? So that's basically the kind of money that's actually revolving around the startup ecosystem for that matter. So it's not just all show and no go. There is actually money involved, and you can get really well-paying jobs if you get into these startups, well. So that's basically the gist of what I wanted to cover, but we'll come at the very interesting numbers because I also wanted to share a very a financial perspective for that matter, because that way you'll also cover the entrepreneurial aspect of it, apart from just the tech side of what is happening. Apologies for the noise. Right. Anyway, so right. So again, like I mentioned during the first slide, it's that number of space startups 5 years ago was 5. Now we have around 50, and a simple extrapolation will basically tell us that we will have over 100 startups in the next 5 years, and then most of it will be really sustainable, right? Now, one thing that we have to understand is that we are just basically extrapolating the curve in a very linear manner, which means that with no support, we have actually shown a 10 times increase in the number of startups, right? But what actually happened here in 2020? Actually, two very important, very interesting things happened. One is the formation of NewSpace, that most of you would know, which is going to be the governing body for the private NewSpace ecosystem in India, that basically launched a while ago. Two is the creation or the hint of a geospatial policy, or the draft of a geospatial policy that Indian government is actually working on right now. So these two are basically going to serve as a huge supporting pillar for the entire industry, and that means it is going to essentially act as a catalyst for all the space startups that exist. So there are two possibilities now. One is that a lot of space startups that are currently trying to sustain at this point in time will actually become sustainable. At least there is a lot of chance for them to actually become sustainable because of the support. Two, the number of startups is also going to be exponential. Not hugely exponential, but at least on a very minute scale, it's going to be exponential. Where I'm getting at is that it's not essentially linear, because now the entire trend is changing. Everybody is looking at space. Everybody wants to do something with the space ecosystem. So I think that is something that we have to really, understand. But one thing that we also have to know is that space tech in general, and space tech in particular, takes a lot of time to develop, which means that not a lot of people know that SpaceX actually started out in early 2000s, and it was only in 2013 or 2014 that they actually did the first mission. So they've been working for 10 years in silence, and nobody actually knew much about them. And only after two failures and the third successful launch, these people actually come to know of a startup. A lot of people actually come to know of a space startup called SpaceX, and there is a guy called Elon Musk who's actually trying to do something, right? And that is exactly how difficult building something that is going to do with space is. At least all of us have to understand. So tech deserves the respect, and tech deserves the time that it requires to develop. That's something that all of us have to know and understand, right? So it's not something that's going to come out of an actually Pandora results, and people could say, you know what, you had like 5 years. So what have you done in those 5 years? What do you have to show for? Nobody can ask that. Because for all you know, you could have been working your asses off, and what you have is very little to show for. But then that doesn't really mean anything to the ecosystem. So that's just out there, right? And the industry market cap again is around $300 billion. Of course, that is inclusive of the satellite industry also. But if you put the prospect of asteroid mining and interplanetary missions that may have to follow, then that is easily a $1 trillion industry. Which means that, like how IT got a break 10, 15 years ago, after the dot-com bubble and the burst, space will essentially get a breakthrough. And we are actually, in a poised at a really great time to see that happen. And there are, of course, signs that it is going to happen in the next few years, for that matter. So, I mean, if small kids are actually, looking to, watching this video, or if you guys have some brothers or sisters who want to take up space, but then they're really, doubtful about taking up the domain, I think this will really, help and, just put the picture out there in terms of putting the picture out there. So that's basically it. And the investors largely say, at least the investors that I have spoken to, I have networked with on a personal scale, they basically, explicitly mentioned that it doesn't matter how many avenues, like in space, or, the seed program be in space, or the other support the space policy program, it really supports, but then nothing can actually guarantee the return on investment for any space startup, for that matter. For all you know, if there is one screw that is a little bit loose, then $100 million equipment goes boom in space, and that's all. You can do nothing, right? And nobody is to blame for that. Nobody is to be blamed for that. That's what you have to understand. And that is not something that is repairable, right? So if you lose $100 million equipment in space because of a small loose joint, then your entire startup is dead. So all of the work that you've done for 10 years basically amounts for nothing, right? So that is basically kind of risk that we're also talking about, and that's something really important that we have to note. So that's basically one number. And in fact, I promised you guys that I will also, talk a little bit about the space policy and then how that is going to help. In quickly in a minute, I just basically, summarize that part. Is that a lot of players, say for example, there is Pixel that we discussed about. These are actually building satellite and then putting it on the orbit and then trying to, build their own IP and then do something about it. But the point is, 5 years ago or 2, 3 years before, nobody actually knew about the kind of frequencies that are actually allocated for these startups or that could be used for industrial purposes, right? Or for corporate purposes. Nobody actually knew that. In fact, there is no body that is going to tell you that, this is the frequency range that you can actually use in order to build your own satellite and then do something about it, right? So just to know that itself, it took a lot of time, around 1 to 2 years for a lot of players in order to get clearances, get something done. Now, what is going to happen because of the space policy draft is that everything is going to be clearly defined to the T. At least everything that's required is going to clearly be defined to the T as much as possible, which means that the entire process, the entire bureaucratic process is going to speed up, is going to fasten, in a really huge manner. That is going to support a lot of players in a very huge way. So that is the importance of an actual space policy. Then you would actually know what kind of IP you can develop, who you can build it for, what can you actually make, and then sell to players internationally, what you cannot do, right? That's really important, to know what you can't do also in space, because everything is ITAR regulated. So when I say ITAR, it means International Traffic and Arms Regulation. So that is exactly why you cannot get an internship in a space company abroad, and nor can you work in a space company abroad, right? So yeah, because space comes under defense. So just something for you guys out there. Right. So that basically in a way concludes the entire entrepreneurship and the space startup side of it. Of course, the very introductory part, which I wanted to speak about. I hope these numbers actually make some sense. Oh, there's actually another number here. So a lot of startup founders that I've spoken to, in fact, Srinath from Agnikul, Bharat from Skyroot, a lot of other players. In fact, they have to meet, the number of investors that they have to meet were in the lower triple digits, which means they have to meet 100, 130 people and then pitch to them in order to get 2 or 3 investments. So imagine the ratio and the effort that they have to simply put in order to raise funding for their company, right? So it's really difficult. That's something out there, right? So I think that basically concludes the tech part of what we are going to talk. And this is basically, for you guys to check out on YouTube. Just go type Unbounded, and the first thing you see is going to be the podcast, which is my podcast. And until now, it has been completely focused about space, startups, meeting a lot of people, talking to them. If you look at the lower left side, so this is the director of the Science Space Agency, Dr. Gillis Rabin. We spoke about the, space startup ecosystem in India. And in fact, he basically said there is a lot to be learned from the Indian space startup ecosystem. And they actually visited the team in us and a lot of other startups in order to learn something out of it and then go back to France and try and implement it. In fact, PNS is one of the world's oldest, space players, and they want to come to India and then look at the startup ecosystem here and then learn something out of it, which speaks volumes about India's capability. So that's basically there. And the lower right, you can see Narayan Prasad, who is the poster boy, perhaps, of the Indian space startup ecosystem. This guy basically goes around the world and then he acts as a voice. He's the CEO of a startup called SatSearch, which is based out of Netherlands, but he's a really good voice for the Indian space ecosystem. In fact, he's contributed in so many ways for that. And top, you can basically see the founders of the Steam Indus, the Skyroot, and there are a lot of amazing investors there. We have Mahesh Vishesh and again MP out there. So these are the kind of people that I try to bring on the show and then meet and really have meaningful discussions for you guys to watch and then learn about the ecosystem and the industry itself. So that's basically Unbounded for you. So just go on YouTube and then check that out. And that is the talk in itself. We basically just come to the end of it. Of course, I haven't really spoken about Alenia because I did not, want to talk too much. But then I'll just quickly move to the end slide here. Uh, yeah, just give me a minute. Yes, so you can basically see Alinea Ventures LLP. A lot of you must have been actually wondering what this is all about. So the entrepreneurship bug caught me when I was studying in my first year in college. So ever since then, I basically decided that I wanted to have a startup after graduation. So I thought, why not have a startup that is going to help other startups come out of India? So that's basically my startup, Alinea Ventures LLP, which is an incorporated company under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs by Government of India. So we are actually trying to create a platform that is going to help a lot of other startups that are looking for funding in order to meet investors and then try and contribute somehow in a meaningful manner to the entire Indian startup ecosystem itself. So that's basically the goal of what I am trying to do and what we are trying to do here at Alinea, and that's basically the talk. So thank you so much for having me, and over to you guys.
That was really nice, Mr. Nithish. Like you have shared some interesting and fun facts, and also about Bollywood even. And then you even said like how to be patient with the startups and things like that. And then it was really nice to hear the numbers that you have shared about. And also, yes, you did say about the breaking the stereotyping. Like 5 years ago, we had five space things coming there, and after 5 years, right now in 2020, there are 50 and startups. And then, yeah, it is a very positive and optimistic speech, I would like to say. And yes, you told about Alinea, which is a startup to help other startups. That is really very thought provoking, and it is like really so great to hear about you. And yes, we have few questions coming up, Nitish. Like, yes, there is something called a question coming up like this. What is the quantum of business opportunities in space sector in India? Like, can you answer this? Nitish, can you unmute yourself? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think the organizer actually muted that. Anyway, I think now we're fine. Right, that's an interesting question because that's the first slide that we covered basically, right? We just try to extrapolate the numbers and then have the numbers talk in terms of the kind of opportunities that are available in terms of the new space ecosystem itself. We had 5 before, we are 15 now. We are going to have a lot more than 100 in the next 5 years. So I don't essentially understand what whoever is asking the question by the term quantum. But I mean, you can't really break this down further, other than just quoting numbers and then basically have them speak. So I think it is really huge. It is going to become even more attractive and huge in terms of money making, in terms of investing, and in terms of exploratory opportunities as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Nitish. And I hope the question is clarified. You are okay with it. And then, yes, we have another question coming up. What could be the challenges for young entrepreneurs in this arena?
Right. So I think this is something that I often speak about when I, go for a talk or, do a webinar. Is that a lot of us are actually oriented towards getting a job, and then, trying to settle very quickly in life and then do all the things that people would want to do after that. The main thing that we have to note here is that we have been, trying to play it safe the entire time. We haven't really known how it is to walk the wire. At least that's how it is in the Indian side of things. But if you take a country like the United States, entrepreneurship is greatly appreciated. Failure is greatly appreciated for that matter. I mean, if you fail, nobody really cares at the end of the day, and that's the attitude there. But here, if you fail, it's like you actually lost everything, and there is no purpose for you to live. I think that's how people actually treat failures here, and that has to be, the defining factor for why we are not actually the job creators. Instead, we are just the people who are going to work for the creators in the US right? But of course, now it is slowly changing. People are actually trying to understand and realize the importance of taking up their own initiative. In fact, I would appreciate you guys, and then you guys have chosen to do something or create something like this called G.I.T.A with the help of your own professors, just so you could create opportunities, empower people around you for that matter through something or the other. You just did not stay quiet, and I think that's the biggest challenge that we have to overcome. Is that we always come up with a lot of reasons that doesn't really matter in order to not do whatever it is that we want to do. Only in retrospect, when we move around like 5, 6 years from now, when we look back, we will realize that, oh my God, that reason was really stupid. I think that's something that all of us have to, understand that be a risk taker. Immediately after you graduate, do not try to look for a job. Even if you do try to quit it, I would say, if you are, of course, family situation and everything permits, and try to create something. Just try to create, be a creator instead of trying to, work for somebody else's vision. You have a vision of your own. It doesn't matter if you have to skip fields. It doesn't matter if you have to, really, bite the dust for 5 years. Just accept it and then focus on learning as much as possible, because this is the time to learn and this is not the time to earn, right? So only when you have the skills can you actually, you will anyway make up for all the time that you spend learning without any money after you develop your skill set in a great manner, right? Just don't just go for a job now. That's what I would say. Again, this is a very personal thing, right? So the challenge is basically to overcome this mindset. Of course, at this point in time, there are a lot of factors that will affect this. There is a lot of circumstantial reasons. So just make sure that you don't let it affect your entire or the ultimate goal, and then try to be a creator. That's what I would, essentially say. And the thing is, don't wait for opportunities to come knocking your door, because they will not. Try to get hands-on in as many things as you can. It doesn't matter if you're building a water rocket, or it doesn't matter if you're building a drone. It doesn't matter at all. Just try to work hands-on, because that is the only way to learn about space and the entire ecosystem itself, at least in India. Right? Nobody's going to teach you anything. Nobody's going to, come and say, I'm going to mentor you. No. You have to be able to, do something for your own self. So help yourself and help will find you. I think that's what I would say.
The question the participants have asked has been cleared by Mr. Nitish. And yes, this is the time to learn. And also, yeah, be a creator, as Mr. Nitish has told. And yes, that's it. And we have another nice, interesting question coming up, Mr. Nitish. It is, how important is control systems engineering in space sector exploration?
Right. So to be very honest, that is a subject that I really hated during my degree, the control systems part of it, because I like to work hands-on, and I really do not like to dabble with the controls and everything. But then it's very very important. You can go out and build a rocket. You can go out and build a rocket nozzle, bring in all the fuel and everything. But at the end of the day, who's going to tell the rocket how to go? And there comes the control systems part. It doesn't matter if you build a satellite. At the end of the day, who is going to tell the satellite when to switch on and off, and how to orient itself with respect to the magnetic fields and all that? That is again going to be control systems. Doesn't matter if you build a rover. You can test it on the ground and everything, play with remote control toy, whatever it is. But then at the end of the day, somebody has to basically tell the rover how to go, and then when to deploy the solar shield, whatever it is, right? So it is of course an integral part of everything that's going to happen in space. So there is no real question at all there. It's like you can't really remove control systems out of the equation when it comes to space. That is that much important. Of course, that doesn't mean that you need to know control systems in order to be successful. Take for example, I really do not know anything about, at least not enough about the control system aspect. But then I managed to somehow work on a project somewhere. So it means that you can actually specialize and then choose to work on something else as opposed to control system. But actually having a little bit of knowledge about how things work and who's going to tell what is essential. So yeah.
I think the question is clarified without everything. And also, we have one more question coming up, Mr. Nitish. It is like, can you highlight the avenues open for undergraduating students of various core branches?
Right. So I think this is in a very general, perspective question here. Right. So for me, I personally did an intern when I finished my first year. So of course that was a paid intern. I did not really care because I really wanted to just go and try something out and then learn something. It doesn't matter if I have to give some money in order to learn stuff, because that was not the time to really. I mean, who's going to give an intern in the first year in a space tech company, right? So, but then I said, okay, let me just try doing that. So one thing that I did after that is that I really made sure to talk to as many people as I can, network with as many people as I can, and then get their contacts, and then build a personal network, so that during my second, third, fourth year, I can easily get other interns as well. That is the most important thing that all of us have to do. You essentially don't have to get an intern in the first year itself, but what I am saying is that if you find some opportunity that's available, be it in terms of an intern or a project elsewhere or somebody actually doing something really interesting, or you want to have your own initiative itself, the only thing that you should care about is to talk to as many people as you can, is to network with as many people as you can, because then basically the possibilities multiply, right? In fact, I got invited to the Space Tech Conclave, H2020 that happened this year, the international conference where a lot of embassy people, I mean people from the UK Space Agency, from the French Space Agency, from the German, DLR and all that, and that was through just a network. Narayan Prasad actually gave an invite and referred me so that they actually invited me, and that's how I went there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the opportunities, and that happened because simply I messaged them on LinkedIn, about something that I had to do for Unbounded. So that's basically how it happens, right? So you don't really know what kind of opportunity. I can't, of course, talk for all the core branches out there, because I am, at heart an aerospace engineer, and I think that again, one thing that you have to understand is that it also applies for other branches. I'm just talking about the principle and not the very specific. So I had to cold mail hundreds of people. In fact, I would even say 1,000 people in order to get one thing done. So, and I really don't bother at all. I just open my email ID, look for people, and then just mail something, right? So if you just stay quietly and then if you just wait and then expect some opportunity to open up, then nothing is going to open up at all. It doesn't matter what field you are in, and then it doesn't matter what is it that you're trying to do. You have to take the initiative and then reach out to as many people as you can.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nitish, for that patience. And then, yeah, it was really a great session with you we had. And yes, it is, you showed like you have to chase your ideas, and that will lead to your destiny. That is what I can summarize overall your session. And thank you so much, Nitish. It was very good having you. And now I would like to hand over this uh, next session to Mr. Vinil. Over to you, and he will be giving vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Vinil.
Thank you very much, Nithish, for giving us such a wonderful session about space and entrepreneurship. And it is, I guess, it is very informative session for the students of Andhra University and other students as well. Thank you for a wonderful session, and we are happy to hear you this Sunday. Uh, so thank you. Even in your busy schedule, you gave us time and gave a nice talk. Thank you, Nitish.
So no problem at all. Thank you so much, Vinil, and the professors and the organizing team here for inviting me, and thanks to Andhra University for opening up such an avenue. I think it is going to help a lot of people who are trying to do great things, and this will certainly empower them. At least that's my goal. And feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. You can basically go type Nithish Kumar and you'll see the profile there. I'm always available for any questions that you guys may have. Or you can basically get my email or contact from me, and then you can hit me up as well. So feel free to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nitish. I thank you all for spending your nice time with us, and I hope you all are benefited with this session. And I also thank Professor P. Mallikarjun Rao Garu for giving this wonderful opportunity and opening this avenue called Gita. And I also thank Professor Ramasudha ma'am and AU Computer Cell as well for supporting us in building this wonderful Tech Talk platform. I also thank my team. Thank you, Chaitanya sir, Gautam sir, Rajesh sir, Maurya, Reshma, Nitisha, and Surya as well. So we will see you next week in the same time at the same YouTube channel. Please stay tuned to our channel with your and share our channel with your friends and family, and also subscribe our channel for more interesting informations like these. And please like and subscribe our channel, and also let us know your views about this session and about this session in the comment section below. Thank you. Have a nice day and a nice Sunday as well. Thank you all. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram. Thank you. Thank you all.